Gracious Father, we thank you for bringing us here. We're happy to be in this particular church, to be able to come and worship you. We're happy to have our friends joining us and taking the time to be also here with us and for the afternoon event that is happening. I don't know if there's any other clubs, any other adventurous clubs. They're on their way here or will be driving up here. So we ask, Father, that you may protect them. But right now, Lord, we need to pause. We need to slow down, and we need to let you take over. Speak to us, Father. Touch our hearts. Open our minds. Help us understand the message you have for us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, very good. So we have started this series a few weeks ago. And I'm not going to ask you the title of the series because for sure you know it by now. But for those that are visiting, we are trying to connect the dots from the different stories that are in the Bible. Obviously, there's a lot of stories in the Bible, a lot of events. We won't be able to touch all of them. But we want to understand what connects them, where it starts, and how to read. So when we open the scriptures, we don't just read an event out of context. And so 2-3 weeks ago, we started this series, and we had our first sermon where we looked at rebellion, the rebellion that began in a perfect place, a rebellion that began in a place where there was no sin. And so we talked about that, and we looked at some of the characteristics of heaven, some of the characteristics pertaining to Satan himself. We talked a bit how rebellion was able to begin in a perfect place. And we also learned that God did not plant pride in Lucifer. He did not create his evil tendencies. He did not design rebellion. But heaven is a place of love. And where love is, then choice has to be there, right? And that choice does not apply just to us human beings. That choice was also given to the angels, Lucifer included. So God created freedom, the freedom of choice. He created them with intelligence and with a capacity for love. We cannot blame God for what happened. We can only say that in His amazing love, He gave Satan or Lucifer and the angels the choice to love him back. Now, last week, we brought the controversy, the rebellion, down to earth. And last week, we looked at the Garden of Eden and the events that happened in the Garden of Eden. Everything revolves around the idea of trust. Can we trust God? Is God worthy of being trusted? And everything revolves around that. And Satan tried really hard to cast that doubt in Eve's mind. And so humanity had just broken trust. They were hiding. They were afraid. They were ashamed. And God did not walk away. Instead, He came looking. While humanity, after eating of the fruit, steps away from God, God steps forward to come to them. That is the God we're trying to understand, we're trying to learn. Before Adam and Eve ever had the chance to apologize, before they even understood what they had done, God spoke hope. He did not begin with punishment. He began with a promise. So before they even said, forgive us, we made a mistake, God said, yes, but I have a plan. What you did is wrong, but I have a plan. And there will be one that is going to come to rescue and to fix this situation. So right in the first 3 chapters, the book of Genesis, we have the gospel. Like I mentioned, if you don't read the entire Bible, just read those first 3 chapters, and you have a beautiful picture of who God is. A God that has all the reasons to walk away, and he's actually the opposite. He does actually the opposite. He walks towards us. So that's what we talked about last week. Today, we're going to continue. And today, we're going to try to answer a very interesting question. So, we have a promise, then what? What happened after that? God made a promise to us, but then what happened after that? And so this is where we're going to pick up today. After the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, they were put away, thrown out of the Garden of Eden. The world, instead of getting better with the realization of what they did, just got worse. And it was from bad to worse. And so you imagine a timeline, and you start going through that timeline, and you're seeing things going bad and really, really bad. And it comes to a point that God is saying, all I see is iniquity. There's almost nothing good that we can salvage from the people. And so we read this very interesting verse in Genesis chapter 6. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. Now, if you're like me, you might have some questions. Because everything that I read everywhere else in the Bible about God does not match this verse. The image that I get from God from the rest of the Bible does not match what this verse is telling me. If I just read the verse like this, and the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth. So did God make a mistake by putting humanity here on earth, by creating humanity? Was that a mistake? Did God really regret to the point of saying, you know what, I'm done, I'm through with you guys, I don't care about you guys anymore? Is that what God did? Is that what the verse is saying? On the surface, it kind of feels like that. But there's a word here that we need to understand it a little bit better. And brace yourselves, because this might change the concept and the view we have from God. I've heard many people, the ones that try to bring Christianity down, telling us that God is not a fair God. You step away from God, you sin, and God comes and crushes you. And God comes and punishes you. It feels a little bit like that. But here's the interesting part. The word regretted is actually the same word in the original Hebrew as grieved. Same word. Translated here in 2 different ways. And I'm going to put it there so we can actually understand it better. So, regretted, which in Hebrew, it's Nahem, means a change of feeling rather than a change of mind or surprised. God is not changing his mind. He's not rethinking what he did, but his feelings are hurt. It means to have compassion, to grieve and lament for his creation. It's often in the context of a broken relationship, similar to a parent pained by a child's self-destructive path. So you don't stop loving that boy or that girl that is going down on the path that you know is not going to lead them in a good place. It's a destructive path. You don't stop loving them, but your emotions, your feelings hurt. They become affected. And you may have moments of deep sorrow. Not because now you're a parent, but because you see where they are going. For us, regret usually means, I didn't know this would happen. For us, usually that's what it means. We don't know this usually happened. But for God, it means, yeah, I knew the cost. and it still breaks my heart. I knew the cost, and it still breaks my heart. This is not divine incompetence. This is divine love. You see, so when we read, and the Lord regretted, this is not God saying, I'm going to punish you, I'm going to hurt you, I'm going to discipline you. But this is God saying, I love you. I really love you, and it hurts me to see what is happening. It hurts me to see where this is going. If we can't translate that same verse, and this is my translation, all right? Do not copy and paste it in the Bible, all right? This is Roger translation, okay? But if we want to use a more in-depth concept of those words, regret or nakam, as in the original Hebrew, maybe we could translate it that way. The Lord was moved with deep sorrow over the brokenness of humanity, and it caused him profound grief at the deepest level of his heart. Now, this changes that image that the previous translation brings from God. Now, what we have here is not a punishing God, is not a God that is ready to strike us. Now, this paints a different picture of God. Regret here reveals that God is relational. God is affected by human choices, and God allows himself to be wounded by love. It reveals to us a God that is approachable. It reveals to us a God that is deeply interested in what is happening here on earth, and that hurts and suffers with our choices. I remember when growing up, my parents, and I would hear at church, they would say, God is not happy with your choice. Usually it came after I would do something that my parents were actually not happy with, but they kind of extended that to God is not happy with your choices. Well, the reality is that God loves us, he cares, and he hurts and suffers with our choices. A God who loves deeply will grieve deeply. That's not weakness. That's intimacy. And so if you remember, those of you that have been listening since the first sermon, there's two words that I have used quite often: relationship and trust. All of this at its core have the idea of intimacy. You need a relationship to develop intimacy. Intimacy brings trust. And so when God said, I'm going to start over, I'm going to destroy earth, it was not because he was mad. It was not because he wanted to punish, but it was an expression of grace. So when you think of the flood as a way for God to show us that he loved us. He could have killed everybody, destroy mankind completely. That would probably solve the sin problem because there was no more mankind, no more humans to sin. But God spared one family. And God started over again. Unfortunately, you know, we it seems like we go in cycles. And so we tend to do the same things over and over. So not too long after that, another incident grieved God again. And so shortly after, a group of people come together. They are united, they are organized, they are together with one purpose, and then they say, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. Do you notice the similarities here with Satan? I want to climb up to the most high place. I want to climb up to the mountain where God sits. Let us build a city that reaches out to the heavens. I want to be just like God. Oh, come on, Eve. If you eat of the fruit, that's nothing bad's going to happen. You're just going to be like God. You see what's happening here? You see the similarities? And then they say, let's make a name for ourselves. Least we be what? Least God does something bad to us. That's what they're implying. Let's do this. Let's prevent this in case God comes back and tries to do something bad. What are they missing here? Relationship, trust, intimacy, love, knowledge of who God is. They're missing all of that. And so the image they have of God is so distorted that they think, we got to do this. We got to protect ourselves from God himself. That's all Satan's lie. What happened to heaven, moved down to the Garden of Eden, carried on to the flood, and now it's happening again here. And so God goes through the same motions again. Oh, this is not good. But remember, God, after the flood, made a promise. Remember what that promise was? I will not do what? I won't destroy mankind again. I will not kill them again or anymore. God made that promise. And when God makes a promise, he fulfills that promise. So, God then had to come up with a different plan. Therefore, its name was called Babel because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. I found interesting the irony in this verse. They want to build so the Lord does not disperse them. He was like, oh, that's a very good idea. Let me do what they don't want me to do. I will disperse them. And so God sends them over the face of the earth. All of this, not because he's mad, not because he wants to punish, but because he wants to demonstrate his love and protect the promise he made back in the Garden of Eden. I will send somebody to rescue, referring to the Messiah. He saved the family, and now he's doing this to protect the promise he made. And so, it's very interesting when you read the Bible. The first 6, 7, 10 chapters of the Bible take about 2,000 years. They span for about 2,000 years. It's like they just go fast. And then there was the flood, and there was the Tower of Babel, and that's it. 2,000 years goes through all these 10 chapters. 10, 11 chapters. And then comes to chapter 12, and it's like, whoa, slow down, because now we need to go slow here. You know what happens in chapter 12? Now the Lord said to Abraham, God comes down and God speaks to Abraham. And the Bible, it's almost like intentional. Moses wrote this, yes, in passing, you have 3 chapters for the creation and the fall and the promise, and then the next 7, 8 chapters talk about, whatever happened in between. You have Cain and Abel, you have Enoch, you have the flood, you have the Tower of Babel, and then it's like Moses said, okay, now this is really going to pick up here. And this is really going to matter. You guys need to pay attention to this. Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your house, from your country, and your kindred, and your father's house, to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. What is God doing here with Abraham? What is he trying to do? He's creating what? In Adventist lingo, we would say a covenant. He's entering into a covenant with Abraham. God is saying, let's be together in this particular covenant. You journey, you stay with me, you walk with me, and all of these things will happen to you. I will make a big nation. This is not God selecting a person at random. This is not God picking Abraham because he had beautiful eyes or because he was rich. This is because God had a plan. He had a strategy. Remember, there was dispersion. Humanity now was spread out all over the world. And God says, I will bless you and make your name great. So what? So that you will be a blessing. And in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. So now God is taking a step further. Remember the promise. Remember the question. What did God do after the promise? Well, God continues to move. God continues to do his thing. God continues to take this promise further and further. And now he brings Abraham into the picture. And he enters to a covenant with Abraham. He said to Abraham, look toward heaven and number the stars. If you are able to number them, then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. And then he had, know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in the land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions. Again, God meets with Abraham, and God explains and shares this with him. But before we go to that, let's talk about this idea, covenant. What is a covenant? Contract? Okay. Say it again. Promise? Okay. An agreement? How is contract? Is there a difference between a contract and a covenant? Sorry? Okay. Okay. They were unconditional. Okay. It would happen no matter what. All right, let's see here. Contract says, if you do your part, I will do mine. Right? You buy a car, you borrow money, you sign the contract. If you do your part and pay for that loan, at the end of the loan, you'll get the title. The lender will do his part. But if you break at any point that contract, that agreement, that contract in and of itself is going to end, and you're left with a big mess. Right? In other words, contract is heavily dependent upon whom? Upon us. Contract focus on our ability to fulfill something, right? Now, a covenant says, I am binding myself to you. Even when it costs me something or everything, I am still going to bind myself to you. Do you see the difference here? Contract is negotiable. Contract is two parties agreeing on something. A covenant is relational. A covenant means that even if you walk away from this covenant, I will still fulfill my part of the covenant. Because the covenant is not just dependent on your merits. The covenant is dependent on our relationship. And I will always fulfill my side of the relationship. That's why a covenant is binding, is God binding himself to us, even if that costs him something. And we know that it was at great cost. It was at great cost that God fulfilled the covenant. Characteristics of a biblical covenant: God takes the initiative. He is always the first one. God makes promises, and the covenant ultimately reveals God's character. So when you read the different covenants that you find in the Bible, and by the way, when you look more carefully, those different covenants are pretty much the same. Covenants given to different people, different times, but they basically are the same because the covenant is relational. Is God saying, I want to have a relationship with you. I want to build intimacy. I want to build trust. The trust that was broken in the Garden of Eden. And it's interesting that as in the Garden of Eden, where God is the first one coming down, when it comes to a covenant, God is the one that takes the initiative. And then God makes promises. Promises that he will fulfill even. The promises are not bound by us. They're bound by God himself. God's commitment to the covenant. And that's where we see God revealing himself in that covenant, or in those covenants. When humanity breaks trust, God does not abandon the covenant. He carries it. That's why the story keeps moving forward. Eden, to Abraham, to Sinai, to Jesus. One promise repeated again and again, because love does not give up. When God has all the reasons to walk away, God says, I will still fulfill my part of the covenant. I will still be faithful to my side, to my part of the covenant. So let's go back to the text that we read a few minutes ago. God promised Abraham that his family would bless earth, right? And so look at the heaven. Abraham at some point, he's kind of struggling because he can't have children. So God says, look toward heaven and number the stars. If you are able to number them, then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. Abraham is struggling. They're not getting any children. And he's like, God, do you need help with this situation? I can probably help you a little bit here because so far nothing is happening. And God comes and reassures him, I promise you'll have descendants. And I'm going to take a step further. It's not going to be just one or two. Look at the stars. And if you can count them, that's how many your offspring will be. That's how many descendants you will have. But then, just a few verses later, God gives him this terrible news. Know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in the land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions. What is God saying? Abraham, here's the good news. You're going to have a lot of descendants. Here's the wrinkle to the story. At some point in time, your descendants, your family, your offspring will be slaves in Egypt. Now, you know the story, right? That happened, right? God gave him a warning. And sadly, that was part of the story. Sadly, that happened. So, close to the end of the 400 years, and in Egypt, they cried out. And God heard their cries. And God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. Now, sometimes, again, if we read this on the surface, the idea God remembered can imply, yeah, God is too busy for us. God is distant. He probably put the covenant in the drawer and forgot about that. Now, the idea of remembering implies now God is going to move forward. Now God is going to take action. Not before, because before they were not ready. But now finally they were ready. And so now God is taking action. He's moving forward. And so God sends them a very specific message and says, speaking to Moses, God says, "Say therefore to the people of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will deliver you from slavery to them. And I will redeem you with an outstretched arm, and with great acts of judgment. I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who has brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians." God is ready to move forward. The plan is in motion. Everything is lining up. The dots are falling in place. And so God is ready to move. And then the plagues happened. Things moved quite quickly. They leave Egypt. What an amazing day that must have been for them to walk out, no longer as slaves, but actually as rich people, to walk out of Egypt, going into the desert. But you see, the problem is that you can take them out of Egypt. Sometimes you can't take Egypt out of them, right? They're free. They're no longer slaves. But in many aspects, they still think like slaves. Oh, it would be best for us to go back. We're going to die here. Over there, at least, aside from the whipping and the torturous hours of work, and aside from the lack of food, and aside from everything else, at least we had something to eat. And take them out of Egypt, but Egypt is still there. And so God takes them, instead of taking them directly to the promised land, God takes them to a mountain. And in that mountain, one of most spectacular / terrifying / amazing divine manifestations occur. God is ready to speak to them right on top of that mountain. And so God says to the people, "You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and the holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the people of Israel." You know what the people said after? "We'll do. Whatever God asks us to do, we will do." But the interesting detail about this is not what you see, but it's what is implied. You see, as I mentioned before, you can take them out of Egypt, but they're still stuck in Egypt. They are free men, but they don't have an identity. They don't know who they are. They're struggling to find their own identity. So this is what God did. "You yourselves have seen what I did." First step, God delivers them from Egypt. Did they ask? Yeah, they cried out. Did they deserve? Probably not. Nonetheless, God delivers them from Egypt. And then, "I bore you on eagle's wings. I brought you to myself." This is relationship. These are words of relationship. This is God establishing and developing a relationship with them. And then, "You shall be my treasured possession. You shall be to me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation." Now here God is giving them their identity. This is who you are meant to be. This is who I want you to be. A treasured nation, a holy nation, a kingdom of priests. God is rebuilding everything that was lost. God is putting it together. He's making them whole again. And then on chapter 20, still on that mountain, we have maybe one of the most important verses or chapters in the entire Bible. And it starts by saying, and God spoke all these words saying, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Interesting, this idea, bring it back. Time after time. Remember when you were in Egypt. I am the one that brought you out. Again, God is pulling out Egypt from inside of them. They're still struggling. They have still a long journey to be able to see themselves as free and to see them as God's people. God is fighting. God is working on that. And now, God gives them what we like to call the law, the 10 Commandments. And this is really where things get interesting. You see, the law is not a path out of slavery. It is a path into freedom. God is teaching former slaves how to live as free people, how to trust again, how to love again, how to reflect His character in a broken world. That's the purpose of the law. We like to use the law sometimes to fulfill our own ideas, but the law is not a guarantor of our salvation. Taking a step further, when God gives the 10 Commandments, He writes them Himself. Interesting. This is how important the law is. He writes them Himself. That matters because God is not outsourcing this moment. He is personally revealing His heart, revealing His character. So when we read the 10 Commandments, instead of reading thinking, okay, these are rules and regulations given to us by God, we need to read them as God is revealing Himself to us. And now that changes the picture about the 10 Commandments. Now that brings a whole different perspective regarding the 10 Commandments, including the 4th commandment that we so much love, the Sabbath day, right? So, before we look at the 10 Commandments, I want to mention something briefly here. The law is not a letter to earn salvation. Okay, I think that's pretty clear. The law is a revelation of God's character. We talked about this, we mentioned this already. The law protects relationship and builds trust. And obedience then is a response, not a prerequisite. So God is trying now to teach them not just about Himself, but also about how to live as free people, as free men, as a free nation. And so, God gives them the law, and the law can be simply divided in four segments, or in 2 segments, I'm sorry. The first goes from commandment 1 to 4. So let's see. God protects and God reveals. Remember, God is protecting not just the promise that He made, but above all, God is protecting the relationship. And the law is an expression of that, of God protecting that relationship. So, first command says no other gods, all right? We're here minimizing. We're not going to read everything. It's not because God is a jealous God. It's not because God is a selfish God that just wants us for Himself. But it's because God knows that if we start getting distracted with other gods, the relationship will be affected. And when the relationship is affected, that's when we open the door wide for problems, right? And so God is asking for exclusive trust, not out of selfishness, but to protect us. You see, God revealing His character, God desires relationship, not rivalry. No images. God is looking for an authentic relationship. He doesn't want just a halfway relationship. He doesn't want us to now look at an image and spend time with that image. He wants us to connect with Him directly. God wants to be known personally, not controlled. Number 3, God's name honored. Oh, there's a lot about God's name. He wants to protect the integrity of His name because His name, again, is an expression of his character. God's name represents his character. And then number 4, Sabbath rest. Time-based trust. Growing that relationship. Growing that intimacy. You see, so far these 4 commandments have always been about God and us. It's the vertical element here. God and us, right? Pastor, let me know when you're ready. Good? All right. The next ones, we look at the commandments 5 to 10. Now the commandments 5 to 10 are no longer the vertical commands. They are now the horizontal commandments. Because remember, the nation is meant to become a blessing to the world. And you can only be a blessing to the world if you can reflect God's character. If you can't, really. And so it seems like what God is saying is very basic, but God is really showing to them who He is. So we follow the same pattern. Honor your parents. Relational authority. Respect included. God values care across generations. Do not murder. God protects and respects life itself. Every person bears the image of God. We talked about this last week. Do not commit adultery. There's the covenantal trust that is established between us and God. God is faithful and relational and relationally loyal. Do not steal. God is protecting security. God is the giver, not the taker. Do not lie. Truth. There's somebody that is truthful, God Himself. God is trustworthy and truthful. Do not covet. God protects the heart. God desires contentment, not comparison. You see now how the 10 Commandments are now revealing who God is? Are now revealing God's character? Folks, when I grew up, I memorized the 10 Commandments, and they were just a whole bunch of rules. Nobody ever told me about revealing God's character or learning about God's character through the 10 Commandments. It was just a whole bunch of rules. And we do a disservice by believing that. We're missing the point if we just focus, do not do this, do not do that, do not do this, do not do that. No. The focus is, why is God asking? What is God telling us? What is He revealing to us when He says this? In James, we read, anyone who does not love does not know God, because what? God is love. And it's interesting how the New Testament sums up the 10 Commandments. It's not giving us new commandments. Even though Jesus uses that expression, I'll give you a new commandment, it's not doing that. It's just summarizing them down the way we have seen before. If God writes the law and God is love, then the law must describe what love looks like in action, right? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your mind. There's the vertical element. And once this vertical element is in place, then you will become a blessing to the world. Are you following what I'm saying? Are you tired? I know it's lunchtime. Trying to get there as quickly as possible. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commands depend all the law. It's as simple as that. And when I say it's simple, I'm not trying to minimize, I'm not trying to simplify. But I'm trying to say that God is a relational God, and that's what He wants. The relationship that builds trust and intimacy. And we learn a lot about who God is by looking at the 10 Commandments. Now, mankind has this ability to really ruin what is good. And I'm going to finish with this illustration. God spoke the 10 Commandments from the mountain, and the whole nation heard the 10 Commandments. They accepted everything God asks and God tells us we will do. They know about the 10 Commandments. God writes those 10 Commandments on stone, and surely, what do? Right next. Oh, Aaron, can you build us a calf? You can take them out of Egypt. Right? Right after. That's what they do. Oh, can you imagine God's heart? Can you imagine God's thoughts and feelings? I just revealed myself to them. And this is what they do to me. The 10 Commandments are love expressed in structure. I'm just going to bypass this. All right, this is where I want to get. So after that, God looks down, says what is happening. And God says this to Moses. Now therefore let me alone. Leave me alone. I don't want to talk. I don't want to be with anybody. Just leave me alone. That my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them in order that I may make a great nation of you. Doesn't this ring a bell? Did we not talk something similar to this at the beginning of the sermon? Well, guess what? The same word that we looked at the beginning of the sermon is also used here. The same idea is there. We're not talking about a wrath of a God that is ready to punish. We're talking about a God that is so relational, that is hurting with what is happening. And interesting, God is expressing the full moral seriousness of covenant betrayal in order to draw Moses into this mediating role. God is revealing that justice, what justice looks like if nothing stands in the gap. So God is saying, Moses, this is terrible. This is really terrible. Moses now is being impressed with the greatness of what is happening, and so Moses now takes the stand. And he implored the Lord his God. Like, really? Do we need to change God's mind? I mean, God is love. And if we really believe that God is love, then we know that whatever God's going to do, He's out of love. So here the idea Moses implored, he's not that now Moses is trying to change God's mind, but it's God drawing Moses and impressing Moses into becoming an intercessory moment. Into Moses becoming now an intercessor for the entire nation. God is not pushing Moses away. Remember the words that said right at the beginning. Let me alone. Leave me alone. God could have said, Moses, go. And Moses would have to obey. No, but God continued to engage in the conversation with Moses. He is inviting Moses to step in and to talk with him. So the text says, and the Lord relented. That word is the same word as was used before when God regretted having created humanity. His love is now, his heart is wounded. His heart is now moving forward, trying to bring together. So when God has, the word relented does not mean God changed his mind randomly. It means God stayed faithful to his covenant. Nehem, as we read before, means that God is deeply moved, responds relationally, and engaged emotionally with the reality of sin. Okay? Let's continue. So when God has all the reasons to just walk away, the Lord passed before him and proclaimed. Moses is back on top of the mountain. This just happened. The golden calf just happened. Moses is back on top of the mountain. God has all the reasons to walk away. And as he's starting to dictate now for Abraham to write the law, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abundant in steadfast love and faithfulness. Now God reveals to Abraham at a deeper level what the 10 Commandments may not do. Now God shows himself to Moses. Sorry, I keep on saying Abraham. To Moses. God now is saying, Moses, yeah, what they did was wrong. But here, what they did not realize is that I am a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abundant in steadfast love. Yes, the text continues, and I don't want you to think that I'm just putting the nice fluffy stuff there. God still calls the guilty by its name, all right, and the text continues there. But here, I want to show, and that's why I just picked this, that God is again revealing himself as God is love. And the beauty of it comes right after. Let's see here. All right, the first time Israel broke the commandments, God didn't destroy them. He revealed his character. And then he wrote the same law again. The law was never about perfection. It's about relationship. But here's the beauty of what happens right next. Just a few verses down. And he said, behold, I am making a covenant. God has all the reasons to walk away. God has all the reasons to say, I'm done with you guys. And after he reveals himself, God says, I'm going to engage into the covenant again. I'm going to uphold the covenant that I made with Abraham. And I'm going to be faithful to that covenant. Because covenant is a relationship, is not a contract. So, what does this reveal about God? Having a sermon without knowing what this reveals about God is like missing the point, right? It reveals a God who does not make promises and walk away. God made a promise in the Garden of Eden, and now he is putting everything in motion, not just to fulfill, but to protect that promise as well. It reveals a God who stays, teaches, guides, and protects. God who stays, teaches, guides, and protects. It reveals a God does not save and then abandons. God saves and then shapes and then gives an identity and then provides and then reveals himself to the people. God is not trying to control people. He's trying to restore them. So far, we have seen rebellion happening in heaven. We have seen the Garden of Eden destroying what God so beautifully created. We have seen all of that spread out and really destroy humanity. But time after time, God keeps on bringing it back. God keeps on building it because of the promise he made in chapter 3 of Genesis and the promise that will be then fulfilled, not at the cross, but at his second coming. We continue next week.